On the side of a Hawaiian mountain, more than 1,000 feet above the sea, there is coral, broken pieces of reef, shells, beach sand, marine debris that belongs at the waterline, sitting on a dry slope high enough that you would need to hike for an hour to reach it. Nobody carried it up there. The island did not rise and lift it. Scientists went looking for an explanation that could put ocean floor material 1,000 feet up a mountainside. And there is only one force on this planet capable of it: water. A wave came out of the Pacific, climbed that slope, and left the ocean's fingerprints behind when it drained away. And here is why you are watching this instead of a documentary about ancient history. The machine that made that wave is still there. It is still active. It is one of the most famous places in America. And a piece of it, a block of land larger than some cities, is moving toward the sea right now, measured by satellites in inches per year, with occasional jumps of several feet in a matter of seconds. This is Hawaii, the most beautiful place in the United States, built and periodically destroyed by the largest landslides on planet Earth. And by the end of this video, you will understand what scientists have found on the seafloor around those islands, what the coral 1,000 feet up the mountain actually means, and what the honest odds are of it happening again. Start with the seafloor, because that is where the real story of Hawaii is written, and almost no tourist ever hears a word about it. When ships began mapping the ocean bottom around the Hawaiian chain in detail, they expected to find what you would expect: the graceful cones of volcanic islands sloping away into deep water. That is not what the maps showed. Instead, the seafloor around Hawaii is a wreckage yard. Enormous fields of debris, hummocky, chaotic, spreading out from the islands for 100 miles and more, covering areas larger than entire American states, and scattered through that debris. Blocks, not boulders, blocks of island, pieces of mountain miles across. Some of them the size of Manhattan, some far larger, sitting on the ocean floor tens of miles from where they came from. One of them, a chunk of rock roughly 20 miles long lying north of Oahu, carried more than 50 miles out to sea by whatever moved it. Geologists counted the deposits and reached a conclusion that reorganized how we think about volcanic islands. There have been dozens of these events along the Hawaiian chain, at least 17 giant collapses identified in the last 5 million years or so, and they are, by volume, the largest landslides known anywhere on the surface of the Earth. Not the largest on land, the largest anywhere. Some of them moved enough rock to bury a small state 100 feet deep. That is the actual history of these islands. They grow enormous, beautiful, and then a side falls off and slides into the deep ocean. Then they grow again. Think about what that means for a moment. Every island in that chain that you have ever seen a photograph of, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Maui, the Big Island, every one of them is a survivor. Every one of them is missing pieces. The dramatic sea cliffs on the north side of Molokai, some of the tallest sea cliffs in the world, thousands of feet of vertical rock dropping straight into the Pacific, are not a mountain range. They are a scar. They are the inside wall of the hole left behind when half of that volcano slid away. Tourists photograph those cliffs from helicopters every single day. They are photographing the wound. Now, hold that image, a chunk of island the size of a city sliding into deep water. And remember what we covered in our last episode at Lituya Bay in Alaska. 40 million cubic yards of rock fell into a narrow bay and produced the tallest wave ever recorded, 1,720 feet. That was a mountainside. These Hawaiian collapses moved volumes thousands of times greater into open ocean, and that is where the coral on the mountain comes from. In the 1980s, two geologists, James Moore and George Moore, surveyed strange gravel deposits on the island of Lanai. The deposits contained coral fragments, marine shells, seafloor material, and they were found at elevations of hundreds of feet, reaching in places to more than 1,000 feet above sea level. They studied the alternative seriously. Could the island have risen that much? The geology said no. Hawaiian islands sink over time under their own weight. They do not rise. Could sea level have been that high? Nothing in the global record allows it. Could a storm have thrown it up there? No storm on Earth does that. What was left was a single explanation: a wave. An enormous wave that ran up the slopes of Lanai and neighboring islands, and the timing pointed at a specific culprit: a giant collapse off the flank of Mauna Loa, roughly 100,000 years ago, which sent a piece of Hawaii into the ocean and the ocean back up the mountainsides of the islands nearby. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the kind of claim internet doom channels get wrong. That interpretation has been argued about for 40 years. Some researchers have proposed alternatives, that the deposits were lifted by the flexing of the seafloor, or emplaced by a series of smaller events. And the debate continues in the journals to this day. What is not seriously disputed is the underlying reality. The giant landslides happened. The seafloor evidence for them is overwhelming. And landslides of that size in open ocean necessarily generate enormous waves. Whether the number on Lanai is 1,000 feet or several hundred is a scientific argument about a detail. The mechanism is not in question. Hawaii makes megatsunamis. It has done it repeatedly. It is not finished, which brings us to the part that stops being ancient history and starts being a satellite measurement taken this year. Go to the big island of Hawaii, to Kilauea, one of the most active volcanoes on Earth and the most visited volcanic landscape in America. On its southern side, facing the open Pacific, there is a stretch of coast that geologists call the Hilina Slump. From the air, it looks like a series of enormous steps, great curved cliffs, some of them hundreds of feet high, running roughly parallel to the shoreline. Those cliffs are not carved by rivers. They are the top edges of a block of the volcano's flank that has already begun to detach. And the entire block, an area covering something like 1,000 square miles, including the part beneath the water, is sliding seaward. We know this because it is measured directly. A network of GPS stations sits on that flank, the same technology we discussed at Yellowstone and Long Valley, and it records the motion continuously. The south flank of Kilauea creeps toward the ocean at a rate of a few inches per year. Not a theory, not a model, a measurement, year after year. In geological terms, that is extraordinarily fast. And here's the part that matters more than the creep. The flank does not only creep, occasionally it jumps. And we know exactly what one of those jumps looks like, because 32 people were standing on the beach when it happened. November 29th, 1975. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck the south flank of Kilauea. The block lurched seaward several feet in seconds, and the sudden movement of the coast generated a local tsunami at a remote coastal campsite called Halape, reachable only by a long hike down from the volcano. A group of campers, hikers, and a Boy Scout troop were sleeping on the beach under a grove of palm trees. The shaking woke them in the dark. Rocks came down off the cliff behind the beach. And then, within about a minute, the ocean arrived. Survivors described the water pulling out first, then coming back as a wall, picking them up along with the palm trees and the boulders, carrying them inland and then dragging them back out again as it drained. Some clung to trees, some were pulled underwater repeatedly in the debris. 2 people died there, one of them swept out and never found. The wave reached over 20 feet in places, and when the survivors were finally lifted out by helicopter the next morning, the beach they had camped on did not exist anymore. The entire coastline at Halape had dropped several feet permanently, and the grove of palms where those campers slept is now standing in salt water. A small drowned forest you can still see today, the same signature we found on the Cascadia coast and in Alaska. The island had taken a step toward the sea, with people on it. Then, May 4th, 2018, during the eruption that destroyed hundreds of homes in Leilani Estates, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake hit the same flank, the largest in Hawaii in over 40 years, and GPS stations on the block recorded it moving seaward again, some by more than a foot in a single event. The volcano's summit collapsed inward over the following weeks, a caldera dropping hundreds of feet while the world watched on webcams. That eruption was not a flank collapse, but it was a public demonstration of something scientists already knew. This mountain is not a solid object. It is a stack of loose lava layers, built too fast, sitting on a slippery layer of old ocean sediment, leaning over deep water. being pushed from behind every time magma pumps into it. Kilauea is not a mountain with a landslide problem. Kilauea is a landslide that has been building itself upward for 100,000 years. And before we go to the odds, there is one more piece of the Hawaiian record that deserves its own place, because it happened to people whose descendants are still there. April 2nd, 1868, the Great Cow earthquake, estimated around magnitude 7.9, the largest earthquake in the recorded history of Hawaii, struck that same south flank region. The shaking triggered a landslide of mud and rock on the slopes above a valley, which buried a village and killed 31 people in moments. Then, the sea came. A tsunami swept the southern coast of the Big Island, in some places carrying boats and houses hundreds of yards inland, and drowning dozens more. Nearly 80 people died that day. The Hawaiian Islands, which most Americans think of as a place where nothing dangerous happens except the occasional lava flow, have already produced a lethal earthquake and a lethal locally generated tsunami inside written history. And the fault that did it is the same moving flank the satellites are watching now. So, now the question you have been waiting for since the coral on the mountainside: is it going to happen again? And when? And this is where I am going to disappoint the doom headlines, because the honest answer is far more interesting than the scary one. So, let us do the honest arithmetic, because this channel does not do fake countdowns. How likely is a giant collapse? Very unlikely in any human time frame. 17 or so of these events across roughly 5 million years works out to an average interval on the order of hundreds of thousands of years. The annual probability of a catastrophic Hawaiian flank collapse is vanishingly small, far smaller than the earthquake odds we discussed for the San Andreas or the New Madrid zone. There is also a serious scientific argument that many of these collapses did not happen as one instantaneous event at all, that some occurred in stages over a long period, which would produce far smaller waves than the worst-case models. Nobody credible is telling the people of Hawaii to leave, and neither am I. But the honest picture has a second half. The slow creep of that flank is real and continuous. The jumps of several feet during large earthquakes are real and have happened twice inside living memory. Each jump has produced a local tsunami, and the most likely serious event on that coast is not the movie scenario at all. It is a repeat of 1868 or 1975, a large flank earthquake and a local wave arriving in minutes, aimed at a coastline that now holds far more people, resorts, roads, and harbors than it did in either of those years. That is the version worth preparing for, and it is the version the state actually plans for. And Hawaii does plan. This is a place that learned tsunami preparedness the hardest way in America. In 1946, a wave from an earthquake in the Aleutian Islands crossed the Pacific and destroyed the waterfront of Hilo, killing over 150 people in the islands, including children in a schoolhouse near the shore. In 1960, the Great Chilean earthquake sent another wave that killed 61 people in Hilo, after some residents went down to the water to watch it come in. Those disasters built the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, which now watches the entire ocean from Hawaii. And they built something rarer than technology, a culture. Sirens tested monthly across the islands, evacuation zones printed in phone books and marked on street signs, hotels with tsunami instructions in every room, and for the locally generated wave, the one that arrives in minutes with no time for any warning system, the rule taught to every child on that coast is the same rule taught on the Cascadia shore. If the ground shakes hard enough that you cannot stand, do not wait for a siren, go uphill. So, 3 futures, the honest way to hold Hawaii. Future 1, overwhelmingly the most likely in any year you pick. The flank creeps its few inches. The volcano erupts, spectacularly, destructively at times, as it has for as long as anyone has watched it. Tourists photograph the cliffs of the Hilina Slump without ever knowing what they are looking at. Most years are this year, and most centuries are this century. Future 2, the middle path, and over a long enough window, close to a certainty. Another large flank earthquake, magnitude 7 or higher. The block jumps. A local tsunami hits the southern coast within minutes. Damage, probably deaths if it comes at the wrong hour, and a hard lesson for a coastline that has grown a great deal since 1975. This is the scenario the sirens and the signs exist for. Future 3, the giant collapse. A section of the island fails on the scale the seafloor records and generates a wave that does not stay local, a wave that crosses the Pacific and reaches other coasts. It is the rarest event in this entire series. Its odds in any year are a fraction of a percent, and it is also the only event we have covered that would be visible from space as it happened. It has occurred perhaps 17 times in 5 million years, which means, on the geological calendar Hawaii keeps, it is not a question of whether, only of when, on a clock so much longer than ours that no human alive will likely ever see it. Here is my honest opinion. After everything the research shows, Hawaii is the clearest proof this channel has of a single uncomfortable idea. Beauty is not safety. The islands are the most spectacular landscape in the United States precisely because of the process that makes them dangerous. A hot spot pumping molten rock into the middle of an ocean, building mountains faster than mountains can hold themselves up, so that every one of these islands eventually sheds aside into the sea and starts again. Lanai has coral on its mountainside. Oahu has a piece of itself lying 50 miles out on the ocean floor. Kilauea has a block of coastline creeping seaward while satellites count the inches. None of that is a prediction. All of it is a record. And the record says the same thing every mountain and fault in this series has said. The ground is not the stable thing in your life. It only moves slowly enough, most of the time, that we can afford to believe it is. So now I want to hear from you. Had you ever heard that Hawaii produces the largest landslides on Earth? Or that a piece of Oahu is sitting on the ocean floor 50 miles away? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you live in Hawaii or have visited the volcano, tell me, did anyone ever mention any of this to you? I am genuinely curious how much of this reaches visitors. If this video taught you something the travel brochures never will, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And subscribe with notifications on. Because next, we go back to the most famous disaster in American history, San Francisco, 1906, and the part almost nobody knows. The earthquake was not what destroyed the city. The fire that followed did most of the killing, and the men in charge made a decision in the middle of it that arguably burned more of San Francisco than they saved. That story is next. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.